This is going to be looking at some examples of metaphysical and cavalier poetry based upon the notes that the class just took from the video on metaphysicals and cavaliers. So the first is an example that we already know from class. It is a metaphysical poem by John Donne, and it specifically deals with the metaphor or the metaphysical conceit of the compass. As you can see, I've already gone through and circled the ends of all the independent clauses. So you do want to read this as sentences. A couple of things I want to point out that are characteristic of the metaphysical school. You see a near rhyme here. Not a perfect rhyme. This isn't characteristic of just the metaphysical school, but they would often do this. Also, it's key to point out that yet and beat may have sounded more of a close rhyme in the accent of the time, as beat may have been pronounced more of a bit sound, and yet and bit may have had more of a rhyme. Also here, as you can see with the semicolon and the multiple commas throughout this, we have a very complex syntax. Every time we add in a phrase or add in a clause that is separated with commas, we are playing with what's essential, what's non-essential, and we're modifying the idea in some way. Everything other than the subject and the verb is just modifiers, as we have discussed. Also, as this describes at the top, you see lots of words that help to create that logical structure. Though I must go, and though it in the center sit, even though it in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam. This is the author using those rhetorical strategies to carry the idea and carry the reader through the poem. But the most characteristic thing about this particular excerpt is the metaphysical conceit. That is that unconventional metaphor. In this case, it is a compass being compared to the relationship. So if we think about the compass itself and the relationship, we look at the things that the author gives us on which we can put our fingers. We see the fixed foot of the compass, line 27. We see in line 28 where it talks about to move and the other do, talking about the movement of the foot, the movement of the two sticks of the compass around and how they move together and apart. Other things that we have include the center sitting in line 29 here. Let's go ahead and put our line number up here too. Consistency. And then it talks about the leaning of one as one moves away, how they lean toward one another. They never separate. So we'll talk about both of those lines. Leans all the way to home. And then lines 31 and 32. And how is that like a relationship? This is what it says. This is what it means. This is old for us. We've done a lot of this before. Well, the fixed foot, as we talked in class, that is the constant, trustworthy part of the relationship. In this case, probably the woman, if we accept the speaker as a male. To move, but doth if the other do. The idea that they only move together, which does relate further down when we get to the lean. We talk about the center sitting still. One person stays strong and in place while the other leaves. As earlier in the poem we talked about when we read this poem, we have to be strong and not worry about leaving. We're not going to, our love is unique in that we can be separated from one another and not miss one another. And then the idea leans home and hearkens after it, that one of them or both of them always connect and lean or reach for the other, or each other, depending on how we want to look at it. So this metaphor extends throughout this, and it's unconventional because there really is nothing about a compass that we would think of like a relationship. And so the author does have to walk through the idea with us, lay it out pretty clearly. But we end up with the themes of love, but not traditional, not conventional. It is durable. It is lasting. Interestingly enough, it might be a comment on the love of the Robert Herrick poem that we're going to look at below from the Cavalier. The Cavaliers being so focused on chivalry and the idea of romantic love, and this saying, I don't need the traditional romantic love. Our love is unique. Our love can be separated. We can be away from one another and still love one another very dearly. So that's going to bring us down here to look at the Robert Herrick. So the first thing I want to look at is some of those conventions, the conventional imagery, and very florid, flowery language. This is just a short example, but we'll still be able to see it. Here we see rosebuds, of course, literally and figuratively very flowery. Flowery image and language. The glorious lamp. There we are, very florid again. Note the addition of the uplying, getting, and the sole purpose in that is to add syllables. For the sake of the meter. Characteristics specifically of the Cavalier as opposed to the metaphysical, so that the meter is smooth, comfortable, not upsetting to the reader. Makes it much more polished. So here, yes, we have metaphors. We have more conventional metaphors. We have the metaphors of the rosebuds. And we have the metaphors of sun, the metaphor of sun. But if we look at these, like I said, they're fairly conservative, fairly traditional. Roses, the buds are young. Beauty, as it is associated with the rose, and love. We have smiles and dying, as they are associated with time passing. Happiness passing to sadness. And that comparison being to time or love. Then we have the sun, as the sun is compared to time. Another conventional metaphor. Saw it a lot in Shakespeare. We've seen it a lot in older poetry. That the sun is getting higher. It's approaching mid-day, or in this case, midlife. We take it figuratively as it's meant to be taken, and that it is literally setting. We think of it figuratively as coming to an end of time or life. So if we think of the title of the poem, To the Virgins to Make Much of Time, we think of virginity, youth, innocence, possibly beauty associated with this as well. To make much of time. Time is passing. The sun is moving across the sky. Soon it's going to set. Gather ye rosebuds while you may. Make the most of your beauty and your youth while you may, because time is going to be passing. This sounds like beautiful advice on how to live your life from Herrick, But as we will look at this in the larger context of the whole poem, Herrick may have had a bit more of a self-serving purpose behind this as well, as he's speaking to young ladies.